We make things. We use our hands, minds, and machines to build, to fix, to improve. We're known as do-it-yourselfers, home improvement fans, fix-it fanatics, inventors. At our core, though, we're all makers. So let's jump in and make something. Hi, I'm Ron Hazelton. Welcome to the show. Did you know that a swimming pool, even in the off-season when it's not in use, can still be a serious drowning hazard to children, pets, and wildlife? I didn't realize it, but I do now. So today, I'm going to replace my potentially hazardous and not so attractive pool cover with one that's good-looking and, more importantly, safe. But first, I'm heading over to a friend's house who wants to install cabinets in a small guest kitchen. He's challenged me to do the job in a single day. I'll get to test my mettle, and you'll pick up some time-saving techniques. So grab a cup of coffee, settle back, and join me on another house call. Today I'm headed across the Throgs Neck Bridge and out to the eastern end of Long Island, to the town of East Hampton. I'm going to visit my friend Norm Stavin. So what's the project for today?
I've got a little cottage up the road. I started in the kitchen renovating, got the floor in, and love your help with the cabinets.
How many days you think?
I think two of us to do it in one day.
Really? Okay, I'm game. Let's take a drive over and look at it.
Well, here you go, Ron. This is it.
You have stripped this down, haven't you?
Yep. Yes, sir.
So what's the plan?
Well, I took everything out, repainted, put a new floor in. We've got the white melamine cabinets with cam.
When Norm went to a local home improvement center to purchase his cabinets, they provided him with a scale drawing showing the style, size, and location of each cabinet. From this, we can easily visualize the finished project.
Now, while Norm is outside unpacking the cabinets, I've been laying out the position for the upper wall cabinets, which we'll be putting up first. Let me kind of reconstruct it for you. The base cabinet will sit on the floor and come up to about here. Typically, that's about 34.5 inches. On top of that goes the countertop, 1.5 inches, and then 18 inches from the top of the countertop, the bottom of the wall cabinet. That's 54 inches total. I made a mark there, so we'll draw a level line now right on top of that. Thanks, Norm. Now, we're going to tack this piece of 1x4 on the wall here, right along that level line. It's going to give us some temporary support for these wall cabinets as we put them up.
We leave the nail heads slightly extended so they'll be easier to pull out when we remove the ledger.
Good. Okay, let's put the cabinets together for this.
The cabinets Norm has purchased are in kit form, which means we'll have to assemble them ourselves. Each cabinet comes with detailed instructions, and even though Norm and I are tempted to ignore them, good sense prevails and we start reading. Step one is to install wooden dowels, which will both strengthen the cabinet and help us position the parts for assembly. Glue is applied to pre-drilled holes and spread around with a nail to thoroughly coat the surfaces. Then we insert the dowels and tap them into place.
The heart of a knockdown fastening system is this cam and this post. This is the way it works. The post goes inside the cam, and as the cam is rotated, the post is pulled up tight, holding the two pieces snugly together.
It's a snug fit between post and hole, so I put my hammer to use, pressing the post down firmly, then tapping it once for good measure. As we insert the cams, we make sure the opening on the side of the cam is lined up with the pre-drilled hole on the edge of the panel. Now that the hardware is in place, we can start putting the cabinet pieces together. We fit the cams directly over the posts, then gently turn them to lock the pieces together. Once we have three sides constructed, we slip the cabinet back into grooves cut in the sides and bottom. Now we're ready for the top. The pieces fit snugly, so a plastic mallet is used to gently tap things into place. A quarter turn of the cams will pull the panels tightly together and hold everything in place. We attach the hinges next. There are pre-drilled holes for each piece, which makes measuring unnecessary. And assembly is as easy as turning a few screws.
We're ready to start hanging these cabinets on the wall. We're going to begin with these three right here, which are going over in that corner.
And instead of putting these up individually, we're going to attach them together into a sort of a sub-assembly. The easiest way to do this is to lay the cabinets on their backs on a flat surface. Then check to make sure the cabinet faces are flush with each other. Now, as you can see, this cabinet's a little bit lower right here. It creates a ridge. We want to bring this up. So one way to do that is to take a putty knife, use it like a shim, slip it underneath the cabinet here. The further we push it in, the higher it's going to raise this until both of these surfaces are flushed. The even surfaces are held together with clamps. Now that everything's clamped into position, we're going to attach these permanently using wood screws. Before anything can be hung, the wall studs need to be located and marked. An electronic stud finder simplifies the job. I want to show you something on the back side right here. This is called a hanging strip. It's a 3/4 inch piece of wood. The screws have to go through here and not here because this is way too thin. So through here and into the wall studs, which we marked earlier, right here. We're going to set the bottom edge of the cabinet on the top of the ledger strip. Okay, down to you. There you go. Now, all Norm has to do is push in. Doesn't have to hold the weight of it up. You got it?
I got it.
I'm going to let go and grab some screws. We've already transferred the wall stud locations to the inside of the cabinet, so we know exactly where to drill. Well, that's good and strong. Now we can take off this ledger strip and use it on the other side. Well, we're assembling the base cabinets right now. They go together the same way as the wall cabinets, using the dowels and this post and cam system. But some of these have drawers, and that means that we'll have to install these drawer glides on the sides before the cabinets are put together. The glide system for these cabinets has two components. The second is mounted on the bottom edge of the drawers. Next, we remove the baseboard so the new cabinets can be positioned right up against the wall. Okay, Norm, to me just a little bit.
Okay, right.
Okay, good, good. This is our first base cabinet. This will be the sink base, and we're centering this underneath this window right here. And down here on the deck, we've cut holes for the water supply line and the drain. Looks good. Okay, Norm, check her if you would from front to back.
That's good, Ron.
Once we know we're level, we attach the cabinet to the wall stud. Then we're ready for the next one. Set it right in there. Okay, we're a little low on this side right here. To raise the cabinet on the low side, we slide tapered shims underneath. We remove the excess by first scoring the shim with a utility knife and then breaking away the part we don't need. Once leveled, we attach the cabinets to each other with wood screws. Norm then attaches short pieces of wood, known as cleats. These will give us a way to attach the countertop to the base cabinets. Well, this is our countertop, and as you can see, we've already put the sink and the plumbing hardware in. It's so much easier to do it when the countertop is out than afterwards. So, Norm, let's just drop this down. Back first. Okay, there you go. You clear?
Yep.
And then drop the front end.
Slide that in like that. Yep.
Excellent. Then, from underneath, I screw through the cleats and into the bottom of the countertop. Now for the finishing touches. We attach the doors. Norm nails the toe kick onto the front of the cabinets. Then we replace the baseboards, slide in the appliances, taking care not to scratch the floor or pull our backs, and you know, Norman, I don't usually do curtains, but I'm making an exception in your case because this kitchen merits it.
Thanks. It's a nice touch.
Stand back. I just want you to remember what this looked like this morning. And what a transformation.
Like night and day.
Wow. Listen, my good friend, it was good seeing you again, being here in East Hampton.
I appreciate it, Ron.
Hope you enjoy the cottage. No, thank you.
Go.
All the best.
Cheers.
Now, take a look down here. You'll see what's about to happen. As soon as I finish this cut up to here, this whole panel is going to drop out. That could create some splintering or a loud noise which might frighten me, neither one of which I want. So here's a quick way to prevent that from happening. I'll take a couple of blocks of scrap wood and nail them to the inside panel here. Now, watch what happens when I finish this cut. There. No splintering and no loud noises.
Each year, more than 300 children under the age of 5 drown in home swimming pools. Another 2,600 end up in emergency rooms with submersion-related injuries. Now, it's true that most of those drownings and injuries happen during the swimming season, but during the off-season, when the pool is closed, it still represents a hazard. Now, inside this bag, I've got about 35 pounds of rock. Now, watch what happens when I drop it on this pool cover to simulate a child falling in. Within seconds of hitting the water, the weight pulls the cover away from the pool deck and begins sinking. The pool cover closing over on top. It's not difficult to imagine what this would mean to a child or animal that had fallen in. Not only is my current pool cover potentially dangerous, but it fills with rainwater and melting snow and is a catch-all for falling leaves and blowing debris. So I decided to go online and look for a solution. A search leads me to the Mako company. I think I've found what I'm looking for. A few days later, Phil Saltzman shows up to begin taking measurements. First, he drives a metal stake into the ground, measures off 20 feet, then drives in a second stake. Next, he makes a series of chalk marks around the pool perimeter at regular intervals. Then measures the distance to each mark from stake A and stake B.
34.9, 36 feet,
Now,
5 inches.
this is where that old high school geometry comes in. By putting those measurements into a computer, it's possible to accurately plot the pool shape and dimensions and make a custom cover that will fit precisely. A few weeks later, it arrives. After unpacking, the cover is pulled over the pool for a test fit. Five-gallon buckets of water are used as weights so that most of the wrinkles can be pulled out. Once it's in place, Phil's assistant, Jen Galato, verifies that the scale drawing generated by the computer is the same as the actual cover. It will take a lot of tension to stretch this cover taut, and that will be provided by a series of 42 high-tension springs, each of which has to be attached to a reinforced strap, then covered with a protective plastic sleeve. Next, Jen measures back from the edge of the pool and marks the deck at each strap location. Then Phil sets up his hammer drill and begins boring holes at each mark. Brass casings are set into the holes and driven into place. Then spring-loaded inserts are dropped inside the casings and locked in position with an Allen wrench. Finally, a tensioning bar is used to slip the end of the spring over the insert. When the cover comes off in the spring, the protruding inserts can be dropped flush to the deck with a twist of the Allen wrench. You know, there's usually more than one reason for doing any home improvement project. In this case, I wanted a pool cover that looked great, one that would make it easier to open the pool in the spring, and most important of all, be safer. Well, I think I got all of those. Now, the manufacturer says this pool cover is strong enough that an elephant could walk across the top. Well, I'm no elephant, although I may be headed in that direction, but I am going to see what happens when I try to make it to the other side. Wow, that's some pool cover.
You know, I think we could all agree that home heating costs are going in just one direction, and that's straight up. Now, my feeling is I want to do everything I can to keep that expensive warm air inside my house. Now, my home has a couple of fireplaces, and when they're not in use, I want to make sure that that expensive air is not going up the chimney. You'd think that just a damper in there being closed would be enough to keep that from happening, but not necessarily so. Take a look. Now, this is a very interesting solution to the problem. It's called the fireplace plug. You can kind of think of it as a plastic inflatable pillow for your chimney. Now, to install it, all you do is partially inflate it with that breathing tube and then slip it up in the top of the firebox. Now, I'll just finish inflating this and tuck the tube out of sight. Some heating experts claim that an unlit fireplace with a damper open can increase heating costs by as much as 30%. Now that could add up to $500 over the course of a season. Well, here's a solution that's relatively inexpensive, easy to install, and pretty much invisible. Now, when it comes to marking implements, what do you prefer, the round pencil or the rectangular carpenter's pencil? Well, my friend Jim, the cabinet maker, likes this one. I, on the other hand, kind of prefer this one. Let me show you why. If you put the round pencil down on a slightly inclined surface, well, there it goes, right off on the floor. The carpenter's pencil, on the other hand, stays put. Now, here's another reason I prefer the carpenter's pencil. If you look very closely right at the tips, you'll see that the round pencil has very little lead right at the very end. That means it's going to wear down fairly quickly. The carpenter's pencil, on the other hand, is more like a knife edge. You can do quite a bit more drawing, in my opinion, without getting a fatter line. Now, to get the most out of a carpenter's pencil, you do have to sharpen it properly. Here's a technique I use. I start by taking a knife and cutting away the wood. And then I finish the point off on a piece of sandpaper. Now, whenever the lead starts getting dull, I just go back to the sandpaper. Or, if I'm in a real hurry, I turn on my belt sander and do it right here. You know, one of the secrets to getting a really professional finishing job is good sanding, but sometimes getting down into these details, now that can be a bit tricky. Try this. Cut off a piece of jute twine a couple of feet long and just wrap it right into the groove like this. And I cross it over and go back and forth. There's just enough abrasive on this twine to get down in there and do a great sanding job.
To view today's projects again and countless more, go to HouseCallsDIY.com. Step-by-step home improvement tips when you need them.
I'm Brian Kelsey. Welcome to House Calls.
Join us as we tackle some great home projects, as well as look back at favorites from Ron Hazelton on House Calls.